Well, cool. Thanks everybody for joining. Excited to get this rolling. So we wanted to bring our friends over at Nomad onto Twitter Spaces with us today to talk a little bit about the past and the future of bridging. And so didn't want this just to be a pure like who is Nomad kind of discussion, but I think it's probably easiest to we can kick off with kind of a bit about you guys, what you're up to, what the project is. So just for introductions, I'm Nate. I manage ecosystem for Moonbeam, and we've got Derek, who's our CEO and founder, and then we've got Pranay and James, who are the leads over at Nomad. But with that, I'll hand it over to you, Pranay. You can give a quick update on Nomad and what you guys are building.
Perfect. Sounds good. And I think we have Barbara here as well, who's another co-founder of Nomad. So we got all three of us on this call, and excited to be here with our friends at Moonbeam. And yeah, just a quick kind of intro on Nomad. We're building an interoperability protocol that uses a novel mechanism. Namely, we use an optimistic mechanism to find a new trade-off space in interop. So the three main parameters that we think about when we're bridging or sending messages across chains is how secure is it, how fast is it, and how cheap is it. And solutions range from custodial and multi-sigs, which are kind of fast and cheap, but kind of insecure, all the way to fully trustless things like IBC or header relays, which are quite secure and fast, but have a lot of overhead, particularly when you're syncing headers in a light client. And so what Nomad does is it tries to anchor closer to the trust minimized and secure side, with the key trade-off being a mild latency. So when you send a message from Ethereum to Moonbeam, for example, there's a 30-minute dispute window where as long as there's one honest actor off-chain, they can watch and basically flag fraud because the state is committed optimistically on the sending chain. So that was kind of a technical intro, but all of that leads me to say the main use case is bridging. And we're very excited to deploy on Ethereum and Moonbeam as kind of the flagship chains 2 weeks ago, and we saw a lot of kind of TVL spike and people bridging assets over, and it was very exciting to kind of see Nomad be deployed in the wild.
Awesome. No, that's a good background. I mean, so for folks that might be joining that are kind of just curious from like a bridging perspective, like functionally, like what does bridging actually do? How does it, at kind of a high level, what are folks doing when they're actually trying to bridge, from Ethereum over to Moonbeam?
We find that, there are a few different things that get called a bridge. There are token bridges, there are like app-specific bridges, and people tend to conflate a lot of the underlying cross-chain communication with the applications. So usually when we talk about a bridge, we're talking about token bridging. Is how do you take your asset that's on Ethereum and move it over to Moonbeam where all the cool stuff is? A lot of people also include the communication channel, like what is the actual mechanism underlying that helps you move things between chains. But those channels are a lot more useful than a token bridge. You can use them to do lending apps or NFT bridges or other things. So from our perspective, a bridge is an application that helps users move money between chains or between domains.
Gotcha. And, so from a history lesson standpoint, I mean, there's been, I remember when I got into crypto back in like 2018, the hot topic was like atomic swaps. And so, from just like a bit of background, like how in the past have people tried to achieve this, and like what about today is starting to make some of it, whether it's more secure, whether it's faster, what does that look like from just a history lesson, if you don't mind, James?
Yeah, I feel like I'm a good person to talk about this because I wasted a lot of time on building these history lessons. Back in the day, we started working on cross-chain atomic transactions. These were invented by a guy named Tier Nolan, a user named Tier Nolan on one of the Bitcoin forums in like 2013 or 14. They never really got productized. We put a lot of work into them over 2016, 17, 18. They have a lot of downsides. One, they can't actually move assets. They can't like mint BTC on Ethereum. Two, they take hours and hours per trade. So anytime you want to swap Bitcoin for Ethereum, you have to spend 4 to 6 hours doing that. And three, they're really complicated to implement and to do safely. So for kind of all of those reasons, people stopped building atomic transactions seriously around 2017, 2018. So at the time, our company, Summa, where Barb and I were working, pivoted away from atomic transactions and into header relays. Header relays are at the core of IBC, TBTC, and almost any kind of more modern, coherent interoperability solution. Header relays are running the remote proof of work or proof of stake in your local chain and using that to send messages back and forth. Like Pranay mentioned earlier, header relays are very expensive. Running the TBTC header relay costs, I want to say, 6 figures per month right now. And TBTC is running the Bitcoin header relay, which is the cheapest possible relay to run. The IBC header relays are subsidized by the chains. And other than that, no one has really built out productized header relays. So while we think they're really interesting and they offer theoretically the best possible security, they've had a lot of trouble coming to market, and they're very expensive to build, operate, and maintain. Other than that, there aren't really any like interesting secure bridges. We have a lot of custodial bridges. We have the most interesting other one is probably Near's Rainbow Bridge, which uses an optimistic header relay. Really cool trade-off space where they're doing optimistic signature verification. But outside of those models, all we see is custodial bridges where there's some multi-sig holding on to all of the funds.
Gotcha. No, it's I think that's good context for everybody in terms of some of the differences just out there, because I think, like you said, the term bridge just kind of gets thrown around, and there are just a lot of different ways folks can kind of take that. And so in terms of what Nomad is providing today, how does Connex fit into the picture? You guys have a partnership there. Love to kind of make sure folks understand where Connex kind of fits into this.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, in that 3-parameter trade-off space, the primary thing that Nomad kind of introduces is a latency. And for users who want to bridge immediately, often the use case for bridging is there's a yield farm with very attractive yield on a destination chain, and hell, I want to ape my tokens in there ASAP and take advantage of that yield. But if I have to wait 30 minutes and then come back and do it, that can be frustrating to me, especially if I have FOMO right now. And so what Connex does is Connex acts as a liquidity network that takes Nomad tokens that are minted already and capitalizes liquidity pools on both sides, on both chains. So in the example of Ethereum and Moonbeam, Nomad tokens may have been moved previously and settled after that 30-minute dispute window, and then Connex routers can take them and basically make them accessible to users. So if I'm a user, I can go to the GUI and I'll interface with the Connex APIs to essentially sell my 100 USDC on Ethereum to one of these routers and then purchase it from them on the Moonbeam side. So no new tokens get locked or minted, but the tokens on both sides basically exchange hands. And for me as the user, now I have this 100 USDC on Moonbeam, and I can basically go to Zenlink or Solarflare and add it to a farm and start yield farming right away. Connext's main trade-off is Connext cannot mint their own tokens, but they are fast, cheap, and secure. So it's almost like a perfect front end to Nomad's back end as a settlement layer.
Gotcha.
This is one of those places where like the trade-offs of atomic swaps are useful. Is Connext is doing something very similar to a classic atomic swap, but they're doing it much faster and with fewer complications than we had to use back in the day. But the atomic swap here is only useful because the assets are already in both places. It can't create those representations. It can't mint and burn tokens. It can only reallocate tokens that already exist. So you need both the Connex layer and some underlying token bridge that handles the minting and burning of representation tokens.
Okay. Okay. All right. That makes sense. So I do want to I want to bring Derek into the fold. I feel like he's been standing on the sideline too long here. So I figured I'd jump down to kind of a little bit about Polkadot and how like Polkadot obviously has needed interoperability. You know, how do you feel like bridging plays into this world?
Yeah. Well, and I'll first maybe start by saying it's just great. It's great, Pranay and James, to have you on the spaces here. A few thoughts there. I think the whole premise of Moonbeam and how we decided to go down the path with Polkadot, a large part of the driver for that was around a bet on it being a multi-chain world, and then realizing that the connectivity between chains is going to be a critical capability. And so by being a parachain on Polkadot, we do get interoperability with other Polkadot parachains in a highly secure and trust minimized way using the Polkadot native XCM functionality. We're just starting to roll out features based on this XCM technology. But while that's that's great, and that allows for this interoperability between Polkadot parachains, of course the reality in the world right now is that not all chains are Polkadot parachains, right? There's the majority of chains out there are not. And so the question is, how do we allow developers on Moonbeam to work with and connect to, non-Polkadot chains? And so this is where, we ourselves have been doing work, and I apologize, there's a little bit of a barking dog in the background here, but, we've been doing work to try to get as smart as we can about what's the state of the art and what are the different technologies out there that can help extend the reach of developers on Moonbeam to assets or even functions from other chains. And this is something where I would say we do feel pretty strongly not all of these technologies are created equal, right? And there is this trade-off space, as both Pranay and James were mentioning. And I think from our perspective, it does seem like there's not our hope with this Twitter Spaces and with other things we do in the future is that I think there is an educational element here, right? I mean, there's a lot of people just are like, okay, like, how do I get from A to B, and let me just ape across whatever it is that's the easiest to use. It's like, well, that may be dangerous, right? I mean, or that may not be what you want to do. And so I think there's this educational component, and there's definitely we appreciate approaches that start with like security first. There's some bar that like has to be met, and then work on UX. And I think it's dangerous. And while UX is very important for adoption, and I'm a big believer in that, you want to make sure that it's understood like what trade-offs are being made. And it's something where if something really is has this like good UX, you want to make sure there's not any dangerous security kind of assumptions or trade-offs being made. So that's one of the things that led us like to Nomad, and we were impressed with their approach. So
yeah, and I want to piggyback off that a little bit because I think it's a really important point to call out. I'm sorry, Nate, if I interrupted you and you're gonna ask another question, but I think the thing I want to call out here is that this is an example of like potentially language betraying us, where even the metaphor of bridging is not accurate here, because what actually happens in most bridges is if I want to move my assets from Ethereum to Moonbeam or any other chain, what we're actually doing under the hood is we are escrowing or locking those assets somehow on the home chain and then minting a synthetic representation on the destination. It's almost like more like teleportation than it is bridging, where there's a clone of you teleported on the other side, where the original version is kept in a cryogenic chamber or something like they have in sci-fi movies. But the point here is, if that cryogenic chamber, if that smart contract or worse, multi-sig or EOA that's custodying those funds on the home chain is vulnerable, then those synthetics that are issued to you on the destination, those are just IOUs that are worth nothing if the underlying is gone. And that's really the risk behind these more insecure bridge constructions. And I think if I'm a normal user, uh, I don't feel like I'm taking any risk, right? I just want the fast and cheap thing, and I want to be able to use the cool application on the other side. But there is this like black swan risk that hovers when these more insecure bridges start gaining more and more TVL, because that shines this light on them and opens them up to vulnerabilities. And I think this was made most evident with the Poly network hack, which was, I think, still is the largest hack in DeFi to the tune of 600 and something million dollars, which is all because it was a something out of 4 multisig, and a couple multisigs were compromised there. So I did want to, I'm just echoing what Derek is saying, that when we start using maybe the more secure or the more kind of thoughtful bridge constructions, there is some UX trade-off that is paid. But what we're trying to do by working with Connext and other partners is use the modularity of these solutions to complement each other and hide that trade-off for the user, so that at the end of the day, the user gets exactly what they want, but we also have some safety that is not kind of done in the cheaper or the kind of shortcut routes that are available to us if we don't think deeply.
Gotcha. I think when we first met, Pranay, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you described it as like a shipping container almost, where like you guarantee what goes in is going to come out on the other side. It just is, it's just secure. Period. So I mean, I always like to kind of focus on more real world things when I try and describe it sometimes to normies in terms of like how things actually work. And I think it's a good way to look at something that, it's going in one side, it's guaranteed to make it to the other side on the other way out. So in that same kind of vein, if we're looking at the coming years, right? I mean, Polkadot's finally coming to fruition, and some of the stuff around the XC assets that we will probably jump into later. What do you guys see are some of the trends for the next couple of years when it comes to the bridging space? So, obviously everyone's focused on token transfers, but what are some of the other cool use cases that may not be thinking about right now, or may not be technically feasible, but maybe you guys are working on them?
We're really excited about multi-chain systems. Anything that gets deployed across 2 or more chains is really interesting to us right now, and it's a really underexplored space. We're starting to see DeFi apps, migrate to other chains, have separate deployments on Polygon or Arbitrum or Optimism, and nobody has figured out a coherent governance strategy for these yet. How does Aave decide what's going to happen on chains besides Ethereum, and how does it propagate those decisions to those chains? How does Uniswap decide where to deploy, how to message that deployment, how to implement governance decisions on that chain? As more and more of these applications spread out to the broader multi-chain space, we're going to be excited about their governance, their deployment, and any amount of like messaging back to their original home that they need to do.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. I 100% agree on that. I think I've said before, we're at the beginning now of what I think is going to be a big shift in the architecture of dApps, from primarily being these like things conceived of as single chain deployments to multi-chain architectures. And this example of the brain on the home chain having the governance features, and maybe the satellites having functionality but not receiving kind of governance signals from the mothership. That's a great example. I think there's going to be other examples where it may be that certain parts of an application, it'll make sense for them to live on certain specialized chains, and other parts of the application may live elsewhere. And we're really right at the very beginning of this. I do see a lot of potential within Polkadot, given its architecture, for this style of approach. But again, there needs to also be a way to combine chains outside of the Polkadot ecosystem to be part of architectures like this. So my personal belief is that it's going to be like computing when it went from, let's say, like mini computers or mainframes to client server. Is going to be a big shift in thinking, and probably people that can adapt to that new style of approach, will lead to new winners and maybe new losers versus what we see today.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the great things about being in the Polkadot ecosystem is that in the long run, you're going to get a lot of this work for free within Polkadot. There's going to be great tooling for communications and moving assets between Polkadot chains. Where it gets a little fuzzier is Polkadot to Ethereum or to Cosmos or to all of these other kind of ecosystems out there that don't have the benefit of a unified interoperability strategy. And that's what we like to focus on a lot at Nomad is how do we connect Polkadot to Ethereum, and how do we enable Polkadot's own consistent, coherent communication strategy to reach outside of the Polkadot ecosystem.
Yeah, James kind of touched on it, Derek. I don't know if you want to give a little bit of input in terms of like the XC20 standards that we just kind of came out with. What was that, last week? It seems like that's kind of we're heading in that route finally on the Polkadot side. I don't know if you want to give a little context around what we announced.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's been there's been a bit of a road to get to where we are now. So XCM, well, first of all, parachains on Polkadot are recently a thing, including Moonbeam. XCM as a standard, as this kind of unified or coherent approach within Polkadot, is only pretty recently become stable for production use. I would say that only happened with XCM version 2, which was from like late November or something. So it's like really we're not that far into this, but this is like something that I see as Moonbeam's key differentiator, right? Where there's a bunch of EVM chains out there, right? But the thing that we can do that's unique is that because Moonbeam is a parachain that's part of this larger system, Polkadot, we have the ability to do different kinds of native integrations based on this XCM technology. The first features, XCM-based features, we shipped quite recently to Moonriver first. As all things that we do ship to our Moonriver Kusama deployment first. They will be coming to Moonbeam and Polkadot in short order, and that's around this like token transfer scenario, which of course is one of the things that was most requested. So we do have these XC20s now. So an XC20 is a substrate native asset. You can move that asset like within between Polkadot parachains using XCM. The thing that's special about these XC20s though is if one of these substrate assets lands on Moonriver or Moonbeam, then it can be accessed from the EVM. So it exposes an ERC20 compliant interface. And so that's cool because then it can be used with all of the existing DeFi and take advantage of this ERC20 standard, which is so heavily adopted and interoperable with all of the other smart contracts that are deployed within the EVM. And I think it's pretty like it's a simple first use case, but I think that we're going to find that it's going to get a lot of traction as we're already working with a whole bunch of teams within the Polkadot ecosystem to establish XCM communications channels and allow for bidirectional token transfers between Moonriver, Moonbeam, and remote parachains.
Yeah, I wanted to add that how important I think Moonbeam's kind of position within Polkadot is, because the way I characterize it in my mind is I see Moonbeam almost as a port of entry for the entire Polkadot ecosystem or federation. The way I see the landscape of chains is that largely they fall into three camps. They're either Polkadot substrate-based chains that vie for parachain slots and connect to the Polkadot relay chain, or perhaps they're the second category, which is Cosmos SDK / Tendermint-based chains, or the third category, which I think is more underlooked but starting to be seen as one set, which is EVM chains or forks of Geth. So whether we like it or not, Geth I think has been the most successful SDK, and a lot of people have forked Geth and changed the consensus mechanism or added features and created very successful standalone chains like Polygon, Avalanche, Harmony, yada yada. Right there's a lot of these now. And while Polkadot and Cosmos historically had this kind of native connective tissue, Cosmos comes out of the box with IBC, Polkadot comes out of the box with XCM, the EVM world has never had that. And that's what's kind of led to this patchwork landscape of bridges and kind of a lack of cohesion within the EVM world. And so that's one of the visions we have with Nomad, is that Nomad can serve as some type of standardized connective tissue which can then be like connected to something like Moonbeam or Evmos, which are respectively the port of entries into these larger federations. And what that does is it enables this, like, all these chains to finally start having some type of connected topology. And initially there might be just one bridge in the graph sense, where Moonbeam and Ethereum might be the strongest connected nodes, and Moonbeam creates this boundary condition between the EVM world and the Polkadot world. And that's where like XC20s come in handy, because now you can move DOT into Uniswap on Ethereum and have DOT ETH pairs, and vice versa. We're seeing USDC and WETH flood into Moonbeam as well. And so this feels very much like the first moment these very large communities and ecosystems can talk to each other, which I think is like a seminal shift towards the multi-chain future.
Right on. Going in line with the multi-chain future, Vitalik actually came out, I think it was like a couple of weeks ago, and kind of touched on how he thinks it'll be multi-chain, but it won't be cross-chain. Figure I'd just throw it up to any of the three. Do you guys have any views on kind of what his take was, and maybe refute it a little bit?
James had a spicy response, so should go.
Yeah, honestly, I think this is kind of a bad take from Vitalik, because not only is the future cross-chain, the present is cross-chain. We've been cross-chain for years and years now. I mean, WBTC exists and is a huge asset. There is already broadly deployed cross-chain assets that are, huge. WBTC is what, like $10 billion? It seems kind of silly to say that the future will not be cross-chain, that there won't be representations of native assets on other chains, because we're already there. And going a step further, people absolutely love USDC, USDT, and these other real-world dollar-backed stablecoins. And those are actually, from a security standpoint, just the same as a custodial cross-chain asset. They're just the same. So USDC and Tether are collectively like $100 and something billion. So what we've seen in practice today for the last 3-4 years is that people absolutely love cross-chain assets. And I think it's really silly to suppose that the future won't be cross-chain.
What was the mountain man thing with Bitcoin? I thought that was pretty funny.
Oh, back in the day, Vitalik said that expecting individual users to run full nodes and verify the entire chain is, kind of mountain man, rugged individualism fantasy. Is that, you shouldn't expect users to run an entire blockchain. And I think Vitalik is actually making the same mistake when he's talking about cross-chain assets. Is he's talking about the security of these bridges, and users won't want to cross them. And I think that's the same kind of rugged mountain manism that he criticized Bitcoiners for back a few years ago. Users care more about the asset than they do about the bridge that it crosses, and they're prepared to use custodial bridges, non-custodial bridges, header relays, anything, as long as they can get their assets where they want them to be.
I think that's why so many of the representation assets are preceded by the prefix any. Had to throw that in there. But I think one point that I think does resonate true for me, and I'm curious what you think, James, is I liked how Mustafa from Celestia framed these as clusters, where organically we'll see clusters of chains that relate to each other and share security start to emerge, because it's almost like, I think maybe Gav called it this, but it's almost like a NATO type formation where you have these links between these chains or these execution environments that are natural, and then when you leave those clusters is when you get into that cross chain versus multi chain distinction. I think this is natural, and I think there will be some level of clustering and local to global type of behavior in terms of how these chains organize, but that doesn't change the fact that commerce wants to happen everywhere, right? Say what you will about globalism, the benefit is that you can basically interact and conduct commerce with anybody in the world, and there is a power to that because the market expands dramatically when you can connect two distinct corners. Now, instead of like waxing poetic about whether this is ideal or desirable or not, I think the key thing here is how do we make those connections as safe as possible, such that if I'm a user and I just want to get my WBTC from one corner of the world to the other, I can do so in a way that doesn't expose me to getting rugged. And that is the harder question to answer, but the more meaningful one in my mind.
Cool. Derek, go ahead if you had a follow up there as well.
No, I think just obviously totally agree, and I mean I kind of see it as there will be these spheres. I think I pretty much agree with you guys that an obvious grouping of things is Cosmos-based systems, substrate-based systems, EVM-based systems. I mean that makes a lot of sense to me. And when you think about, I mean I think of this analogy of like countries, right, where within the country, you're kind of operating under some same umbrella of security laws and so forth. So then movement is easier between like the states and the United States, for example. But when you're leaving the country and going somewhere else, well, then there's like a different set of things, right? There's like a more complicated procedure. And in general, I mean, so you can see that like a Polkadot is in some sense like simplified the problem by saying like, well, let's make, and Cosmos too, let's make this like toolkit for making chains that are compatible by default. But the fact is that a lot of the world is this kind of messier place where there's all different kinds of chains, different consensus mechanisms, different everything. And so that makes this like cross chain outside of these more homogeneous systems, like it's hard. Basically these are like hard problems. But I would just have to agree that where there's a will, there's a way. I mean, people want to be able to move around between countries, even so. That's just going to happen, and to try to think like that's not going to happen is, I would agree with James, like pretty unrealistic.
Yeah, they are definitely hard problems, and unfortunately, in these kind of problems, we have to make trade-offs, and I think a lot of people are pursuing different trade-offs in these cross-cluster, cross-country bridges right now. What we think is most important is, when you're going between these major ecosystems, when there's not a unified bridge like XCM or like IBC, protecting users and their funds is paramount.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I figure we can take a couple minutes. We'll take some questions, but to wrap up, what's the best way to, I think you guys have announced recently some integrations on Moonbeam. So I'll let you give kind of an update in terms of where you sit with some of the ecosystem and how to interact with what you guys are building, and then maybe we can do some questions.
Totally. Yeah, so if you want to try using Nomad and bridging from Ethereum to Moonbeam, check out the app at app.nomad.xyz. Recently, we announced a partnership with both Connext, who's been our close partner in providing that front-end liquidity network to the back-end settlement layer, like we chatted about earlier. But as of yesterday, we also announced a deeper partnership with Zenlink, which is one of the flagship AMMs on Moonbeam. And so there will be Glimmer incentives. I think they've been turned on already, I believe, for certain Nomad assets in Zenlink. And so if you hop in there before those pools start getting crowded, you might get some pretty good APYs. And we're also excited about working with other partners like Solarflare, which is another great AMM team that we've been working with, but also Moonwell, which is a lending protocol that'll be launching on Moonriver and Moonbeam shortly as well. And so as these key DeFi primitives start to come online and get liquidity and some of these blue chip assets that we're bridging over with Nomad, we're excited to see what the rest of the DeFi ecosystems starts to look like on Moonbeam. I think the really cool part about having this EVM in the Polkadot world is this will act as the first place where a proper, fully composable DeFi ecosystem starts to flourish, which will likely lead to a variety of new tokens and teams and projects coming in and setting up shop. And then that just becomes one hop away via XCM from the rest of the Polkadot world. And so it feels like it's going to be a Cambrian explosion. And if you want to be a part of that, if you want to ape in, please be my guest.
Good stuff. All right. Well, we can take, I think we were planning for 45 minutes, so we have a couple minutes. If anybody wants questions or anything along those lines, feel free to, I think, put your hand up and we can have the Moonbeam account bring you up if there are any questions for these guys. All right. Well, unless Peter or Katie or Kathy, whoever's running the main account, tells me that there are hands up, we can go ahead and call it.
I'm just going to assume we solved bridging forever. Everybody's
absolutely, absolutely speechless. Absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you guys for joining. Oh, it looks like we might have somebody.
Yes, Spartan, I have a quick question. So I'm working on a basically on-chain audit of smart contracts protocol and trying to design it sort of to be a cross-chain thing. And so if you wanted to do certain things based on certain conditions across chains, let's say like a chain gets forked and you want to use another chain to reward the bounty for it, or maybe like sort of penalize the auditor that audited it, what sort of mechanism would you use, if not sort of a decentralized bridge or like an optimistic oracle, to implement the checks that will allow a smart contract to determine whether the state of the chain or the state of a certain contract on a different chain is correct? Thank you.
The first thing that you need to do is come up with a definition of correct that can run on some blockchain. From there, you should be able to use just about any arbitrary messaging bridge, arbitrary message passing layer. We have a great pattern for how we like to write these applications. How does the application communicate with the messaging channel, and how does the message get passed between chains and unpacked on the other side? Without knowing a lot about the specific use case, I'm not sure exactly what I would recommend to you, though.
No, thanks. It's very helpful already. Yeah, I started by using the Cosmos sort of IBC definition of misbehavior, but yeah, I'll connect offline. Thank you.
The IBC definition of misbehavior is very much associated with their consensus process and whether the consensus process is faulty. Unfortunately, if a chain itself is faulty, any channel that connects to that chain is faulty. So it becomes very difficult to use general purpose channels to communicate about the state of the chain that is running the channel.
Makes sense. Yeah, that's a great point. I will have to refine the definition. Thank you.
Cool. And one thing I forgot to mention is I think we have Julian on as well to share stuff from the community side. Apologize if I stole your thunder earlier, Julian.
Yeah, how are you, everyone? If you're looking to, get a little bit more involved in Nomad, we definitely have our Discord, which is in the description. And then join in. We have our docs. Obviously, use our bridge to bridge over to Moonbeam, which is really exciting. And yeah, engage in the community, ask questions. We're always around, and looking forward to seeing where we go next and interacting with the rest of the Moonbeam community.
All right, beauty. Any last questions? Feel free to throw your hand up, and we will bring you up. Otherwise, we can call it. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you guys for joining. It was great info. Hopefully we opened folks' eyes to some aspects that they may not have ever thought about from a bridging perspective. So thank you for all the insight, Pranay, James, Derek, and by all means, everybody reach out if you need anything from either of these teams. Happy to help.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks,
All
Mary.
right. Cool. See you guys.